IronOverload.io Hardcore Podcast, episode number 35. Today we're going to be talking about saving up and cheap budget cycles. We're going to talk about how to accomplish this, how to save some money. So, Mobster, first topic. Can you do it? Should you do it?
So here's the thing, guys. I've said, can you? Yes. Should you? No. And there are ways and means which we will get into. But if we're doing a proper cycle, if we're doing a multiple PED cycle, if we need to buy all the bits and pieces that we need to buy alongside the performance enhancing drugs, then I'm going to struggle to do that on a budget. I'm thinking, especially of my American listeners and American friends and American members on our websites, on our forums, and the prices that you pay, even with the tips and techniques that we're going to get into, including buying through sales. I would struggle with doing a proper cycle and you saying a $400 budget. Now, we've seen this come up. So the argument becomes also, and I've talked about this before, what you are trying to achieve. Now, quite simply, is there a way of doing a cheap $400 budget? Yeah, 100%. And we'll talk about specifics, but as an example, and very quickly off the top of my head, I could do a very cheap Dynamo cycle, especially if it was my first cycle, buy the AI and look at the PCT cost. Now, that would be something we need to get into momentarily, but just buying enough Dynamo, for example, a 4 to 6, 7, 8 week cycle is very cheap. It really is. So there are ways and means of doing it, but that might not be what you're doing your cycle for. So, for example, you're doing a summer cutting cycle. I think you would struggle to do it for $400 with everything you need to buy. If you are preparing for a competition, absolutely not. You can't really. You literally have to be given the steroids for free. And we're talking about a normal listener that's got to go out and play, even in sales. The idea that you could get ready for a competition on $400, it just doesn't happen, Steve. And I'm not even talking about crazy mega cycles. I'm just talking about sensible doses of the stuff that you and I promote and suggest all the time. So the question comes down to, what do you want that cycle to do? What are you taking the drugs for? What is your aim? If it's a few weeks bulking on Dynamo, yes, of course you could. And again, you still look at ancillaries and your PCT to be done properly. So it's one of those things, Steve, where I think if you do it unplanned, and we've seen this a couple of times, where members have come onto the forums, they've scored some Dynamo, they've scored some Anavar, they've scored some testosterone from a buddy. They finished their cycle, and there was some left over, and they've got it off them cheap. They've done a deal. The guy needed the bucks, and they've got, that's fine, right? But again, you need to have, is that what you need for what your plan is? Is it appropriate? Is there enough there? Guys have come on there and thought they brought enough and they haven't, or they've got the cycle which they've prayed for, but they haven't got any of the ancillaries ready, and now it suddenly becomes a 600 or 700. In reality, I suspect all inclusive, and I'm just talking about the drugs, not about the food, nutrition, and the training. I think realistically, you're looking at $1,000. So there are ways and means, and we will talk about it specifically. We will give you some suggestions and techniques. But ultimately, guys, it's difficult to be dirt cheap. It's difficult to do a serious, properly done, properly planned, properly executed cycle with just the anabolic steroids, the ancillaries, what you require for a PCT on your health, even blood test, Steve, and be looking at change out of $1,000. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a cycle, post cycle, ancillaries on cycle, blood work when needed. I mean, it can add up really quickly. So $400 isn't really that much money. You got people nowadays making 100,000 a year, and so $400 really isn't much. But let's say you had to do $400, I think you could squeeze it in. You have to get blood work, and pay very little for that. But like in terms of a cycle itself, I think it's doable. You could do a shorter cycle. Some of the cheaper steroids out there, testosterone, you don't need much of it. You can use 150, 200, 250 milligrams a week of testosterone. You can use Dianabol. Dianabol is a cheap steroid. Anadrol is a cheap steroid. Just avoid some of the more expensive steroids out there. Masteron, Primo, Anavar, these are expensive steroids. T-Bol, Turinabol is a cheap steroid. So there's some cheap steroids that you can kind of stack. You could try pick a couple of them and stack them. You could keep it under $400. But like Mobster said, once you start adding the other things to it, let's say you needed blood work, you have an emergency situation where you have to get blood work on cycle or blood work pre-cycle or blood work after cycle, which you should at minimum be getting blood work pre-cycle and post PCT so you can see where your numbers are at. So blood work alone can cost quite a bit of money, especially if you don't have insurance to help out with that. So it boils down to the cycle itself versus the other things. Now, if you run the cycle correctly, you can really cut down on the amount of ancillaries that you need. If you run the D-Bol and testosterone at too high a dosing, then you need to definitely get a aromatase inhibitor. Otherwise, your estrogen issues are going to get crazy. So I highly recommend that you price out your cycles. If you check out, go to IronOverLoad.io, you check out some of the sponsors. I would also wait, and this goes into our second topic, Mobster, sales. Our sponsors are always doing sales. We've got sponsors doing weekly sales. We got sponsors doing sales on like every holiday. I mean, there's like a Valentine's Day sale, there's a Christmas sale, there's a New Year's sale.
Every weekend.
Martin Luther King Day sale. Like every holiday, they find an excuse to do a sale. And it's a great thing for the community because it saves us money. So if you're a smart shopper, you're patient, you wait for the sale and you grab what you can when the sale comes out, then that's a great way to cut down on costs. Some of these, some sources are doing 50% off. So, you're talking about a $400 cycle, Mobster. You can buy $800 worth of gear and get that 50% off. And now, boom, now you're down under 400, just like magic. So that's a really, really good tip is wait for the 50% off sale, be patient, but everyone wants to get steroids as soon as they can instead of being patient and waiting for a sale. So check out the weekly sales, come on IronOverload and check out what the sources are doing.
Yeah. One of the tips, for example, here, Steve, might be to not be brand specific. I've actually said many times I'm not brand specific. There are brands I've used, and I've said that I've used those brands, but generally speaking, and it depends what you're talking about here. If we're talking about a fine, mature 28-day, 36-day matured steak versus a steak that's not been matured, it's a different argument here. But ultimately, our approved sources, regardless of the brand, should have, let's use testosterone cypionate as a great example. There should be multiple brands on there with testosterone cypionate. And the dosages per milligram should all be around the same. So there will be occasionally, and this includes the sales, Steve, times when brand-specific sales take place. And that's actually what's happening right now. We've got a sale on one of the forums where it's a specific brand that's having a sale. And I don't even think they specified a steroid. I think it's one of those buy 4, get 1 free. So it's that kind of deal. That happens a lot. And here's the thing, guys, and we will get into this regards planning ahead, but you can buy stuff now that you're not going to use for a few months. So you can you do cheap deals, a cheap cycle? Yes, but if you buy them now, when they're cheap in a sale, you don't have to use them now. Nearly every single oral or liquid injectable steroid has a minimum shelf life, typically, Steve, of 2 years. Occasionally, we've seen sales where it's a shorter shelf life, and they've told you that. So there you could argue that you've got to use it with it. Steve, as you know, when it comes to shelf life, the reality of the stuff is thus. Same with all medication. Cool, dark, dry place, and it's a best before. It doesn't suddenly mean that the following day after the date that runs out, it's no longer potent, it's got nothing in there. That's ridiculous. It'd be slightly less potent. So quite simply, guys, you can buy stuff with a short shelf life and then put it in good storage and keep it for a while. And you can buy a brand that you wouldn't normally use if it's from an approved source and know that you're still getting, for example, as I just said, cypionate or enanthate or whatever. So there are multiple ways. If you go, I only use brand X and you have to buy it then and there, then you might be missing out on brand Y and you might be missing out on a great deal. So there's stuff like that, Steve, in regards to the things. And this is another thing. I'll bang the drum again, Steve. This is why we recommend and rate and have approved and recommended sources. These are there for specific reasons. It's something you never used to have years ago. And the best way to argue this as well, Steve, is that a couple of the brands specifically that I'm thinking of, and I'm talking about approved sources, they're not brands, sorry, have been around for 20 or 30 years. They've been around when it was a mess. They've been around when it was a war, and they're still here now. And the reason why they're still in that is because they're not fucking you over with underdosed. They're not fucking you over with mislabeled, that it's got the different steroid from what you brought and whatever else. So these are the reasons why we recommend these companies, why we approve these companies, and why, especially when there's a sale on, that would be the company to go for. And again, same thing applies to brands. If a brand's been around 10 or 15 years, there's a very good reason for that. And it isn't because they've been scamming people left, right, and center. And that's the reason why the approved source that's been around 10 years is using a brand that's been around 10 years. And then, guys, who doesn't love a bargain? There's a sale. But again, key, and we'll talk about this momentarily, Steve, buying when it's cheap in a sale and you don't have to use it the moment you got it, guys. Put it into storage, get it ready for that cycle. Let me take you into the next part here, which I think is super important, guys. Can we go out and buy in a sale, or even with a cheaper orals, a $400 cycle? 100%. But the ancillaries, what's required for a proper PCT, the testosterone boosters that you might require post-cycle, the herbals, the protectants, all the things that you want to do to keep you healthy as you possibly can on cycle. Some of your markers are going to get skewed, we know that, but we're staying as healthy as we possibly can, as safe as we probably can. I said, guys, don't cheap out on the pins, the syringes and the needles, sharing and reusing and all that kind of stuff, because they're pennies. So that, you know, when I buy those things, Steve, in the UK here, I'm probably spending $20, and that's for the sharp bin, for the syringe, the barrels, the syringes, and the actual needles. And I'm disposing them properly with a sharp bin, etc. That's $20. Guys, don't cheap out on that stuff. Amazon, eBay, both the medical supplies, easy peasy, no problem whatsoever. So you've got your $400 stack. You've got your $20 in pins and syringes or whatever else. So what else do you need? You need testosterone boosters. You need something to help you post-cycle. And we've got a list. We've got a sticky on the website. Now, Steve, I said this to you in the pre-show. It's very, very easy in my mind, if you're paying, again, outside of sale prices, but even with sale prices, the herbals and the ancillaries and the PCT can easily be $300. In fact, sometimes more. So the idea that you can do a cheap cycle is possible, but realistically, once you start to include everything else, that's when the numbers start to build up. So again, buy it ahead of time, buy in a sale, but you've got to think that's not included in that $400 stack. And again, if you do a short cycle like we talked about, 4, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe, the prices, the numbers are going to creep up, and especially that's dose dependent as well. So a simple oral cycle for $400, no problem, but an injectable, medium, typical dosages, it starts to creep up above the $400 mark, and then we're adding these PCT and ancillaries on top. So those can be brought throughout the year, Steve, even if you're not planning on a cycle. Your PCT is going to be more or less the same. Your herbals are going to be more or less the same. So they can be brought at any time. But they will add, in my mind, a minimum of probably another $300 to the normal prices, with everything included on top of the cycle. So realistically, that's what you should include. You can't do one without the other. So you are looking, in my opinion, another $200-300. What do you think, Steve?
I can take it another angle on this. Look at the money that you're wasting. I can take a look at anybody and kind of like, look, it's amazing how much money gets wasted on things that are completely unnecessary. I'll give you an example: recreational drugs, pot, alcohol, junk food, fast food, restaurant food. Complete waste of money. Complete waste of money, and counterproductive to fitness and counterproductive to your health. You don't need any of that. You don't need any of that. I haven't touched any of those things in a long time. We're talking years. I haven't touched any of those things. And it saves you a fortune. Also, your grocery bills. Learn to shop better. I'm always amazed that people who go to these supermarkets and they fill up their carts like all the way to the top, because the supermarkets and the grocery stores do a really good job of marketing. So they will market these supposed sales, and people will always grab whatever, even if they don't need it, and even if they don't even use it. So they're really clever at doing it, especially around when you're checking out. That's a big mistake a lot of people make, because they'll be close to checking out and they'll see a magazine or see a candy bar, or they'll see a piece of chocolate or something, or gum or something. They'll grab it and they'll throw it and add it. Well, each time you do that, the grocery stores specifically will put things there that you don't need. Okay. But they'll put it there so you can grab it at the end. Do you really need that magazine, the celebrity magazine, that gossip magazine? Do you really need that candy bar? Do you really need that piece of gum? It's just a waste of money. You're wasting $3, $4, $5 every time you check out, and it adds up. So if you go to a grocery store 3 times a week, now you're blowing 15, 20 bucks on things you don't need. So take a look at your grocery store habits and how you're shopping, and learn also to take advantage of deals. There's apps for these supermarkets that you can pull up that will tell you the sales for that week. For example, I shop a lot at Whole Foods. So Whole Foods, I have a Whole Foods app. The Whole Foods app will pull up the sale for the week. There's going to be a sale in the produce section. There's sales in the meat section. There's sales in all these foods. So I can pull up the app and see what the sale is. It might be $4.99 for beef, grass-fed beef. Well, then I know I can go there and get a couple pounds of that. And whatever I don't use, I freeze, and I can use it in the future. Same thing for chicken. Same thing for fruits and vegetables. They've got sales all the time. You can take advantage of that and save money that way. So there's a lot of different ways that you could save money on other things that you're wasting on your day-to-day life. Different habits. How about coffee? Do you stop at Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks every morning to grab an $8 coffee before work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Stop it. You don't need that coffee or that donut. You stop and grab a donut on the way to work. For what? You're better off not consuming that donut anyway. So now you're wasting $5, $10 every morning, and it adds up. So look at what you're wasting money on a daily basis and shave that away. And then that will free up some more money for your steroid use. And it's going to help you get more results on your cycle too. So it's smarter that way. And if you insist on drinking coffee, I know Mobster's a big coffee drinker, then make your own at home.
At home,
It's
exactly.
so much cheaper. It's like
Yes.
50 cents a cup if you make it at home, and it's $8 if you go to Starbucks. How does that make any sense? These are simple things that you can change and tweak in your day-to-day life. So Mobster, talk a little bit about that.
I think there's kind of 2 angles to look at, right? And we see this, and I actually said this in the pre-show, the amount of times, and not just on PED forums, but just generalized forums on Facebook, people coming on saying, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this, that, and well, you are on the internet, which means you have either a data package on your cell phone or, like me, broadband in the house. So I've got both, right? So straight away, I think between those two, I'm spending the equivalent of $50 across. And I have a pay-as-you-go on my phone, £10, so $12 or $13. And I think I've got a thing for the house, which is £30, so about $35. So I'm spending just under $50 a month on those 2 things together. Okay, so you want to have people come online and say, I haven't got much money, but they'll have here in the UK, Sky TV with the sports package for them and the Disney package for the kids, and movies things included, and it's like £50, so $60 a month. Okay, you don't need that. You want it. You guys, young guys especially, that will have to have new rims on their cars and a great stereo for the car. The people that have plans, we have this here in the UK, Steve. I think we have it over there as well, where the car is upgraded every 3 years and they're paying more or less the same every time. But it means that they're paying, for example, here, young people here in the UK, the insurance, just to be able to drive on the road, is, I think now, £2,000, so about $2,500 for the first year or so until their premiums come down. And then you've got the cost of gas. And Americans, you always have it cheaper than us, but it's still, because your car's typically bigger and more, or they use more gas. So you've got the price of gas, which goes up and down. And young guys are spinning these cars around car parks and doing burnouts with girlfriends and the girls that they're trying to chat, you could do the whole thing. So you start to realize, hang on, we're talking about putting drugs inside our body, but we want to be cheap. But we'll spend money, as Steve said, on an £8 cup of coffee, $50 a month on a satellite or cable TV, get new rims for the car, and then bitch about spending 400 or 500 extra bucks on a steroid cycle. And ultimately, what you're looking at here, you're looking at your body. You've only got one of those guys. You don't replace it with one when it wears out. You've just got the one. You're looking at, for example, you guys that are getting into shape, never mind the girls, you guys that are getting into shape just to get girls. So if you think girls got a six-pack, you're going to have to put the work in. So you're going to have to spend some money. And it's kind of one of those weird situations, Steve. The amount of people during lockdown, during COVID, that couldn't go to the gym, so didn't train at all. Then thinking we could have gone out just before the prices went crazy and bought some little bits of weights that you could put underneath your bed or in the garage and done some stuff in the house. So to me, it's just one of those, I don't get it. Ultimately, you're looking at taking care of your body. You're looking at being a freak of nature, looking super ripped, super lean, super strong, male or female, an absolute specimen. But you won't stop those $8 coffee, those £50 cable TV deals. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. I have money. I could do things nicer in the house that I live in. I have an amazing home gym, and I kind of live the way that I want to live. But a lot of the things that I do, like Steve says, I don't. The last time I went to Starbucks, Steve, I think someone gave me a gift card. So I'm going to say it was 6 years ago since the last time I went to Starbucks. But I've got some great coffee here. I had the Blue Mountain Jamaican stuff here, Steve. Whatever, you can buy those things and make it. I think I've got 3 different ways of making coffee here. So it's just doesn't matter. I've got a stovetop, plunger, cafeteria. I've got a capsule machine. I think I've still got an espresso type machine here that I just haven't used for a while. So yeah, I'm up there with Dylan here. I haven't really discovered coffee like Dylan has. I've been around coffee for absolutely ages, and I've not quite got to the point of having my beans roasted how I want them, but I'm not that far away from it. So guys, there are things you can do. Prioritize, and I will say also this is to a less negative way, and I think this only applies to a tiny percentage here, Steve. Well, occasionally they go too far in the other direction. You need to be doing the stuff that you need to do around the house and with your family, and doing a cycle shouldn't take money away from that. So, you need to be able to put food on the table. You need to be able to pay your mortgages, your rent, your bills, and whatever else. Those things need to be covered first. But there will be a lot of things, and a lot of people do this. We reward ourselves with stuff that we don't really need. And then we decide we want to get in shape. And a few of you, and I mean, there's fractions, 2 or 3%, Steve, will go in too far in the other direction. So, yeah, can you do stuff cheap? Yes. And we're going to get into, I think, this last one, Steve, which is important. And I actually take this again. I said this to Steve in the pre-show from the late Paul Borison. And one of Paul's more sensible ideas, because he liked to do extremes when it comes to steroids and come up with like the lottery winner cycle and the getting divorced cycle and all this kind of stuff. So one of his more sensible ideas was actually on point. He said, if you can only do one cycle a year, why don't you make it perfect and plan the whole year for, let's say, 12 weeks. So that's 40 weeks of the year. And he said one of the things he was talking about was stockpiling. Going out and buy the exact brand from the exact source. Back in the day, for example, I don't know, Pakistan in Amphate, Iranian test, whatever. It doesn't matter so much now, but it did then when he was talking about it. And getting exactly the one that he wanted, exactly the right dosage in the form that he wanted, and doing that, say, for example, in January. In February, he would spend any spare money he had on filling the freezer up with steaks and fish and chicken. In March, he would go out and buy the ancillaries, and he would do this a little bit every month for the rest of those 40 weeks. And then when the 12-week cycle came in, everything was perfect, Steve. He could have got the stuff in the sales like we're talking about. He could have gone to the sources that we recommend. He could have got his pins, his needles, his sharp spin. He could have got exactly the right brand, exactly the right dose. He could have bought growth hormone in advance. He could have bought insulin in advance. He could have bought all the things that was going to make this absolutely crazy professional level cycle. But he took 40 weeks to gather all these items together, all stored properly, all ready. maybe working with a prep coach, all those kind of things, and a little $100 a month, half a day's work from a month to get the stuff ready for this perfect cycle, planned ahead of time. Items brought in the sale, every single thing he needed. The only thing that he would need to pay during the cycle, which Steve's recommended earlier on, would be the blood test just before the cycle, during the cycle, and after the cycle. Everything else got to be got ahead of time and ready and prepared. So what sometimes happens, the reason sometimes people want to run cheap cycles is kind of as unplanned. If you plan ahead of time, if you get ready ahead of time, you can save money with those sales. You can have exactly the product you want from the source you want, ready to rock and roll, stored away in a cool box, in a chiller somewhere, stored exactly how it should be, and ready to go. And you've only spent the spare cash that you had every month getting this thing together, getting the nutrition together, getting everything together. All you need to do after the cycle, which is included in the cost, would be your PCT, but specifically tweaking your training and tweaking your nutrition, which is going to happen anyway. So literally, you're making a small adjustment afterwards as a way of keeping your gains. But everything else is planned way ahead of time. So if there was the number one key point to take away from here is planning ahead. What do you say, Steve?
Well, I want to just, I just want to go through some ideas when it comes to how much you're looking at in terms of pricing, just so people can kind of get a sense of, how much they're going to be paying. So, I mean, if we take a look at some of the top sources on IronOverLoad, you guys can go check that out. You guys and gals can go check out, what they got. And if you take a look, a packet of Anavar, you're looking at, between $150 and $200. That's not cheap. Anavar is an expensive steroid. So it's all about picking the right steroids, I said at the beginning of the podcast. On the flip side, Dianabol is $80 for a pack. So you're talking about around 175, $180 for Anavar. You're talking about 80 for Dianabol. And it's the same pack of 50 of them, 50 milligrams. So, you're saving more than half the amount of money. It's about 60, 65% less expensive to go with the D-Bol over the Anavar, for example. So you got to kind of take a look at what you're using. I can also look at Deca. This Deca is 300 milligrams a milliliter, 10 milliliter vial, $90. Masteron is 100 milligrams a milliliter. So it's a third less milligrams per milliliter in the same vial. It's also $90. So here's another example. If you choose Deca, it's 3 times cheaper than choosing Masteron. So that's another classic way that you can save money. But on the flip side, your goals are not going to be the same. Anavar and Masteron are more cutters. Deca and D-Bol are obviously going to be bulkers. So see that trend? The more bulking steroids tend to be the cheaper ones. Another thing to look at is Sustanon. Sustanon here is less expensive than testosterone cypionate. I'm assuming it's because of supply and demand. There's a lot more demand for cypionate than there is Sustanon, even though they're both testosterones. And the Sustanon here comes in at 270 milligram per milliliter, and the test CYP is 250. So you're getting more testosterone per milliliter with the Sustanon, but it's $15 less a vial. So it's all about being a smart shopper and taking a look at these different steroids. With Deca versus NPP, NPP is almost the same price for a vial, and it's only 100 milligrams. So NPP is going to be way more expensive than Deca. So if you wanted to take a nandrolone, then you would pick Deca, and you would save a hell of a lot more money that way than taking the NPP. So those are little tricks that you can kind of take a look at when it comes to buying steroids. Tren, I can use this example with Tren Mobster. Tren enanthate is a little more expensive per vial than Tren acetate. But the Tren enanthate is 200 milligrams a milliliter. The Tren acetate is 100 milligrams a milliliter. So if you want to save money and run Tren, you would go with the longer ester version of Tren, and you would save quite a bit of money. You would save about 30 or 40% because you're getting more Tren for the same price per milliliter. Okay. And So that's another example. So it tends to be the more more the steroids are going to be priced differently. It has to do with supply and demand. It has to do with sourcing them. So, you know, sources generally are going to have bulking steroids be more cheaper and longer ester steroids be more cheaper than shorter ester steroids. So you can kind of take a look at that and kind of shop for the prices that way. And look, if the cycle that your buddy wants you to do involves nandrolone and he wants you to take MPP and you need to save some money, then just switch to DECA. That's a perfect example. If the cycle calls for testosterone cypionate, then switch to Sustanon. Boom, now you're saving money. If the cycle calls for Anavar, switch to T-Bol. T-Bol is cheaper. So these are all kinds of little tricks you can do when it comes to using these steroids, and just be a smart shopper and go on the source's website and shop around and understand what you're buying. Understand that trinacetate and trinaphenate are both trenbolone. They just have a different ester. The more knowledge you have and the more you understand these steroids, the more money you're going to save, is my point. So listen to our podcast, read on the forums, ask questions, and do some homework on this stuff, and that will save you a fortune if you do what we have recommended in this podcast. So Mobster, finish us up and take us to disclaimer. It's a great show.
So one of the things we talked about, guys, is sale prices. I'm going to quote some numbers for you here. And this is actually cheaper than I would normally buy it from a local source here in the UK, Steve. That's how much of a deal it is. Regular price on Dynabol, and this is a sale, I'm not going to name the source, $59, but right now the sale price is $30. Anavar regular price is $125, so a 4-week cycle that would be $500. Sale price $63, so $300, 300 and something bucks, less than that, in fact, 240, 250 something bucks there, Steve. Anadrol regular price $59, sale price $30, and Winstrol regular price $59, sale price $30. So guys, again, buying ahead of time in a sale, checking out the dosages. Like Steve says, if you want something that's a bit rare and a bit exclusive, guys, there's some of you home brewers, and I think we can find this. A couple of our sources even do the powders. Will sell you a quarter of a gram, half a gram, and so on and so forth. And you can do the math. But by the time you've home brewed it, you're kind of paying the produced price. So it's just there. Some home brewers just like to know what they're getting and how they're making it and whatever else. But you can see what these things cost. And as Steve said, the shorter, rarer esters, the stuff that's maybe very competition specific, you can see what those powders cost wholesale, and then kind of work out back that from the production price what they're going to cost, and you'll see that the cost of production and the cost of the raws alone make them expensive to buy. So literally just changing the ester. I mean, that could come down to pinning frequency, Steve, and a preference. So again, guys, we're talking about prioritizing. If your personal preference is for weekly or for every 4 days in terms of your pinning frequency versus daily, some guys, they don't mind injecting daily, so they'll be fine with short esters. But short esters, as we said here, tend to be more expensive. So if they want to pin every day, they want to short esters, they're going to spend more money. So again, it's about planning and your knowledge and doing your research and planning ahead of time. I think it's the number one thing you should take away, guys, because like I said, I can give you those sale prices again, and you can see that the deals are amazing. Steve, just on the Dynabol alone, I would expect full price here in the UK to be another $20 more than the sale price. And we tend to pay less for our over-the-counter steroids from local sources than you do from approved sources and via websites, etc., etc. And that's just here in the United Kingdom. Anyway, we've given you some tips and techniques, guys. Listen up. If you've got something to say, add something into the comments, and give us some more tips for the listeners and the readers of these comments as well. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our viewing is based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.